Morning again. Kia ora. I come from New Zealand. Aotearoa, New Zealand is south of the Philippines. Do you know where it is? I want to talk about the ethics of genetic engineering and planetary sustainability. I am the President of the American University of Sovereign Nations and the Director of the Bioethics Institute. I will be talking about many topics today, but I wanted to start with love. Do you agree the love of thing means wanting it to live?
Yes.
Have you heard of Confucius?
Yes.
People wrote about love in every culture. I think that the gift that we receive when we're born into this world is love. This is the essential human value for the 21st century, as it was for every century in the past. While love is a gift that few are deprived of, which is a deprivation that in itself is an insult to the humanity that our flesh and bodies, it's a norm for all forms of life, for a new life to be given a good start. The ultimate gift that we can share with others is also love. Do you agree? How many of you have children? Now, you may think that's a strange question to ask a group of students who may not be married, or a group of sisters who may have taken a vow not to get married. But it's, I know some people have this. But we can give love in many ways. But human genetic engineering is talking about how do we modify the children that we have through genetic engineering. In order to help us decide if that is ethical or not ethical, we have a field called bioethics. New technology has been a catalyst for re-examination of medical ethics and social ethics and international dialogue and principles. We have fields like medical ethics, dental ethics, environmental ethics, public health ethics, applied ethics, ethics of biotechnology, psychology ethics, business ethics, and so on. Genetic engineering is one of the technologies that makes us think a lot about our ethics. If bioethics is the love of life, what are some principles of how we might articulate or expand on this idea of love? Loving good, self-love, love of others, love of life. This is a relational-based bioethics that I think is a way that we can apply the philosophy of love and wisdom that we have from many people, whether they be our philosophers such as Confucius, whether they be religious leaders, whether they be the scriptures, whether they be the pre-human evolutionary consciousness of life. Maybe these are all some principles we can see. So I'm going to call them the imperatives of love. One imperative of love is the ethical principle of loving good, beneficence. It supports the development of science and technology that might cure sick persons or feed hungry people. So when you hear about ethics, ethics is not just about how do we deal with science and technology. Ethics is actually the foundation of science and technology, the reason that we do it. So ethics is not something which is separate from the business of science or technology or development or business. Ethics is the foundation of what we do. Another imperative of love is the principle of loving life, do no harm. It warns us to do technology assessment on all options, both current and new, to provide the best alternative for the local situation now. So I want to test if the technology or my action is doing good. So what do you study? I hear some people study psychology. What other things do you study in this room? Love? Life? Business?
Nursing,
Nursing?
biology,
Biology? What else?
Religious education.
Religious education. So, all of these things we do could be useful or could harm the society. For example, if you educate when you were little kids, what people told you influences the values that you have. So education and educational technology is one thing. So we can tell you that this value is good to have. For example, respect the opinions of other people. Okay, it's good. It doesn't mean that you respect your own opinions as well. How do you find this balance between ourselves and others? How do we keep that in balance? Another imperative of love is the ethical principle of loving others. Justice makes us consider the risks for future generations and for all to share in the fruits of scientific endeavor. Benefit sharing of technology, affordable healthcare for all, poverty eradication. So we will try to do good for other people. Another imperative of love is self-love. It supports the empowerment of people so they can access technology according to their values. You go to school to get educated because you need to develop your potentials, self-love. Unless you can love yourself, you can't love other people. You have a duty or responsibility to do the best in your life with the gifts that you've been blessed with. And sometimes to overcome the challenges that you've been given. Ethics is also balancing these ideals. We can put it in another way. Doing good against not doing harm. Individual autonomy versus justice to all. And we can see a long heritage of this in biology, medicine, society, and religion. It started in local communities but extended in colonization and global wars. These principles. How do we balance these sets between the plus and the minus, the benefit and the harm, between ourselves and other people? So this is a simple way of looking at ethics. We have common challenges to govern advanced technology, a common need to meet the basic health and social needs of people in all cultures. But we now also have a power of having life in vitro. In vitro means in glass. It doesn't need to be in glass. So we can make human beings in a petri dish. We can take your eggs, we can take your sperm, we can put them together. We can fertilize in vitro, we can implant into somebody else, we can change nuclei, and can we change genes? So I'm going to talk about ethics of human gene editing and human genetic engineering. Coming back to what I said at the beginning, loving life. I think that curing a disease is an act of love. The genetic lottery that we're born with presents parents and society ethical dilemmas. In addition to the social and spiritual lotteries that we're born with, both unconditional acceptance of a living being with love and attempting to cure disease are acts of love. Should the pursuit of happiness ever be made illegal? Should you say to somebody, you are trying to be happy, but we don't allow you to be happy? Can you think of some examples where the law stops you being happy? Are there some things that you wanted to do but you couldn't? Be honest. What do I mean by a social lottery? A social lottery is, let's say, before you were born, you don't know if you're going to be born into a rich family or a poor family. If you're born into a rich family, you are more likely to go to university, as you're doing. You're more likely to get a successful career. You're more likely to live longer. If you're born into a poor family, you are less likely to do these things. So that's a lottery. What's a spiritual lottery? Okay, so if you were born in Thailand, most likely you'll be Buddhists. If you're born in the Philippines, most likely you'll be Catholics. If you were born in Saudi Arabia, most likely you'll be Muslim. Is that right? And so it's a spiritual lottery. If you're born into a family that doesn't believe in the Creator God, and in fact believes it's wrong, more likely you'll accept that belief too. So that's a spiritual lottery. Genetic lottery means you may be born with certain conditions. How many people need to wear glasses to see properly? Put your hand up. You can have a laser surgery, you can do contact lenses. There are a lot of these things. And some people hide it because they think glasses make you look less beautiful. But at university, maybe glasses make the teacher think you look smarter, so you're going to get a better grade. So it may be good to wear glasses in class, okay? And take them off when you go out of class. I don't know the professors if you give better grades to people who look like glasses. Probably they do. So, yet this is a genetic disease. Some people are born with more serious problems with their eyesight. They become blind or they are blind. Okay, so they use different senses, but still it is some sense of a challenge. It can be viewed as an opportunity. And I'm going to come to that. But this is the sort of lottery that we have. That's what it means. So people who try to cure people to make it better, they might offer free education to the poor. They might offer religious education classes to people who want to find God. They might offer genetics therapy to people with a genetic disease. They might offer laser surgery to people who want not to wear glasses. They might offer free glasses to people. So ethics and creative power. The history of bioethical reasoning is influenced by our genes, the forces that shaped and continue to shape these genes into the people, society and cultures that we have. We now have a power to change not only our own genes, but the genes of every organism, and the power to remodel whole ecosystems of the planet, which has made many focus on the biotechnology applications. However, the key questions are more basic. We have the technology to conceive an embryo in vitro, to mix genes from different beings, and to offer life support to those whose body has temporarily failed. We have the power to remodel whole ecosystems of the planet. We can reshape life as digital constructs, for example, virtue life. New technology is a catalyst for our thinking about bioethics, which has been a stimuli for research into bioethics in the last few decades. Some of you may think that if you think who we are, if we're made with a creative power to be co-creators with God, then our creative power is part of who we are. So we should apply technology to make things better. But what's the limit? So we might have some questions. When is it ethical for the law to limit the act of love to attempt to cure a disease? When applying the principle of to do no harm, who besides the parents can claim that there's too much risk not to try to cure a disease? If we have a holistic approach to life, who can decide when a condition should be corrected and a life of suffering is too extreme? Who can decide international norms? How do we balance the freedom of research? So these are questions in particular for human genetic engineering. I don't know how many of you have family members who have a very serious genetic disease. Okay. But they occur all around the world. So can we try to make these people better? How do we limit? Should we stop? That's the question. Then we think about the consequences. What happens if we engineer people to be taller? So let's say we have several images here of tall people and short people. It's very rare now to see very short people because growth hormone therapy is used from children to help people who have dwarfism to reach normal height. But what happens when people within the normal range take growth hormone? How much taller can they be? And in very tall people, is that what you'd like to be? If you want to play basketball. So can you imagine the consequences, for example, in the Philippines? If the Filipino normal body size was the same as the Dutch normal body size, how much extra does it mean? As you know, Dutch people are quite tall. Significantly taller than Filipino people. Yes? They consume more resources. They need taller buildings, bigger buildings, consumes more resources. Is it sustainable? So if everyone in the world wants to be very tall, it's not a good thing. But many parents want children to be tall. I'm not going to ask you to stand up and make a continuum from shortest to tallest, because that's a game that we can do in bioethics. Is it discrimination? We might say that nobody taller than 165 centimeters is allowed to come to university. Nobody shorter than 145 is allowed to come to university. So we're going to make this narrow range of people who can come to St. Paul's University. Is it ethical? Okay, how about we say nobody taller than 2 meters is allowed to come to university because it would have to make the buildings taller. It costs too much money to retrofit everybody. If you work on a submarine, if anyone ever dreams to be in a submarine, there are such limits, yes? Because submarines have to be smaller, otherwise it's too expensive. And if you're very tall on a submarine, you're going to hit your head. Many maritime officers around the world on the boats are from the Philippines. It helps that they are not so tall, because the boats don't need to be so tall and they don't need to hit their head all the time. But here we see an illustration of discrimination against people because of some physical characteristic. For the next few minutes, I want to go through a statement on human gene editing and human genetic engineering from the Intercontinental Summit on Human Genetic Editing and Human Genetic Engineering held in Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok, Thailand, from the 30th of January to the 2nd of February. Now, some of your dear professors came to this summit. So it was organized under the auspices of the American University of Sovereign Nations, the Center of Ethics of Science and Technology at Chulalongkorn University, the Bioethics Institute, accredited University of Sovereign Nations, and United Nations Academic Impact. Our participants included persons from Australia, Bangladesh, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, China, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Japan, Micronesia, Mozambique, New Zealand, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Philippines, Spain, and Tanzania, Thailand, and UK, and USA, and Vietnam. They came as individuals to contribute their reflections. You can find the website. So, as I go through this statement, and then later I'll come back to talk about more of a philosophy underpinning it, how do we approach, as representatives of global humanity, this question of what we should do with human gene editing and genetic engineering? So we came together as geneticists, scientists, medical doctors, lawyers, bioethicists, philosophers, policymakers, youth and civil society leaders to consider what both our future children and our future society should look like, to contribute to global reflection on the question of when and how ethical human germline gene editing should occur and how it should be regulated. So in concordance with the statements of the Organizing Committee of the first 2015 and second 2018 International Summits on Human Genome Editing, we consider that the continued international discussion of potential benefits and risks and oversight of this rapidly advancing technology needs to involve persons from all around the world, including those at the margins, beyond the more formal limits of national academies of science and governments, and should not be confined to academic elites. The participants at the Intercontinental Summit share the commitment of the international summits to foster in-depth and international discussion about human genome editing. Reflecting on the statement of the Second International Summit on Human Genome Editing with a focus on the Organizing Committee's call for an ongoing international forum, we strongly recommend expanding the scope of a call to include international, national and private forums all around the globe to also take part in a discourse and combine efforts to cope with the multiple aspects of the subject of human genome editing. These forums should happen in as many sovereign nations, communities and societies comprised of persons of all occupations and different points of view. Positions and calling from those who err on the side of caution against possible harm from unforeseen changes to DNA and those who consider the potential benefits outweigh the risks. These forums should include those with eugenic goals of positive enhancement of human beings and those who consider editing DNA is counter to nature or playing God. If I ask you, do you think we should engineer your children? What are you going to say? Yes or no? Yes? No? If you were going to engineer them, what would you think you should engineer them to be? Healthy? Healthy? Happy? Smart? Smart? What else? Good looking? Yes?
Tall.
Tall? What else? Obedient to your teachers? Would that be good?
Definitely.
Yes? Not causing any trouble to your dean? Believing in God? Should that be good? Is it a genetic trait? You don't think so? Actually, the so-called God gene is an interesting question. We find, how can we investigate this? So, let's say you are twins. You know what twins are? Does anybody here have a twin? Are you twins to each other? You're wearing the same glasses. That's why you're twins. More than that. Okay. But you're doing your hair differently. It makes it easier for the teachers. Good. But you could, what you could do, you could each day alternate your hair. This would be fun. Then they wouldn't be able to tell. So you do it in turns, each day different, and then you change, and then just see what happens. So it's good we have twins. So if we separate you two to be raised by different parents, more likely your religious choice will be following your genes rather than the social environment. So if one of you goes to a very religious family and one of you goes to a non-religious family, more likely the genetic influence is stronger. So we found this through so-called twin studies. Now, most likely you are living together with your parents. Yeah, the same parents. Because you're here in the same room. But for many twins, what they've done is do that sort of study. And they found that the genetic influence on even religious belief is stronger than the social influence. And even, let's say, you go from you're taken by a family of Catholic believers and a family of Muslim parents, you'll become either devout or not devout in the religion of whatever you're adopted in, which is interesting. So even behavior like this has social influences, spiritual influences, and genetic influences. Okay? So it's very interesting discussion. Some of you do religious studies, so you may know this discussion and debate for hundreds of years on freedom of choice and predestination. If you're interested in the theology, look at the discussions between Erasmus and Martin Luther 400 years ago, the discussions. Does God choose you or you choose God? So that debate has gone on for hundreds of years. But in genetics, we now try and look at twin studies and other ways to see. We still have the same debate. And I think our conclusion has to be the same, that Martin Luther wrote something which I find very useful. He said, even if I know the world will end tomorrow, I'm still going to plant an apple tree today. So even if I know I'm chosen, this was preordained, I'm still going to do something. Doesn't mean. So we have to keep that love of life, we have to keep our choice. But let's say we knew that we're going to suffer from muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy is a serious disorder. You know what will happen. And it's progressive, and emotionally difficult, and of course physically very difficult. So when I looked at the opinions of members of the Japan Association of Muscular Dystrophy, you may not know that I lived much of my life in Japan. Okay, I'm more Japanese than many Japanese. So that's interesting. They were more positive to selection of embryos to be free of muscular dystrophy than the general public. And you might think, why was that so? Well, it's because they had the emotional and financial and social and many other costs of living with muscular dystrophy in one of their loved ones. And they couldn't cope with another. That they didn't see, most of them didn't see it as discrimination to screen an embryo and choose the next embryo that would not have muscular dystrophy. And it raises questions then of, we have this different view. At the same time, we have some members in that group who think it's eugenic, it's against, it's playing God to select. So we have this need for ongoing discussion. How you might do it? Do you have a bioethics club in St. Paul's University? When is the bioethics club going to be established? Today? Marlon has volunteered to establish the bioethics club. But this is, for example, a forum to discuss these different questions that we have. Everyone has to be involved. So that's the sort of thing we might want to do as an international forum. Do you want to leave the questions on the future of human society to old men? No? Because the traditional political rulers are old men, is that right? They make most of the decisions. So why leave the future of society to old men? Why not get involved yourself? Because it's your future. And should they regulate how you have children in the future? Now, gradually, we've got more gender equity in some of the decision making. And the Philippines has been very progressive in developing more gender equality. But still, it's rather paternalistic, still rather dominated. So the fora need to be balanced from different perspectives. I'm not going to read all the statement, but I want to look at some aspects of it. So we solemnly believe that the magnitude of the impact of human gene editing on the world's population justifies inclusion of all relevant voices in the process of enhancing people's health and well-being. Any human being, including those who are born after germline gene editing, like their parents, possesses all inalienable human rights, regardless of any parental desire or technological intervention. So we agree with some things that any human being, no matter how you're made or why you were born, possesses equal dignity. So for example, you might be born because your parents wanted a child so badly. You might be born because your parents had unprotected sexual intercourse when they weren't married, and when they got pregnant they decided they better get married. You might be born from a test tube baby, conceived through selection. You might be born from the sperm of someone who's not the husband of your mother. So these things we discuss in bioethics. We discuss everyone needs to be treated with dignity. For example, if we use research, how many students are there in St. Paul's University? Can you tell me? How many students? A few thousand? How many thousand? How many thousand are there?
More than 2,000.
More than 2,000. Okay? So do you know, for example, that the average non-paternity rate of a person in most countries is around 1%. Non-paternity rate means you are actually not the genetic child of your father. Okay. If it's 1% and it's 2,000, it means 20 people. So let's say at least 20 people in the university, the students, are not actually the genetic child of the husband of your mother. And most of you will never know that. And it's probably better that you don't know that. Okay? Generally. If you do know that, it can cause a lot of social problems. So that's an example of a bioethics dilemma involving genes. This figure is the same in almost all cultures. In some it goes up and down. There are several reasons for this. One is the fact of infertility. Infertility affects, it means if the infertility rate is 10 to 15% in the Philippines, it means 10 to 15% of couples who want to have a baby cannot have a baby without assistance. One of the natural ways to try and have a baby is to have the service of another man just to try if you can get pregnancy. Now you may think that's against all the morals. But this is used all around the world. So how do we deal with that? Now you can go to do a DNA test and you can test. But even more simply, you do a blood test. And sometimes a blood test of yourself, and you think the blood test of your parents, there's some problem here. Please do not think about it too much. Do not use a DNA test, in my opinion. It will just lead to sadness. Because if somebody loves you socially, that's your parent. But that's an ethical dilemma. So no matter where you came from, you are treated with dignity. The same with people whose parents spent $100,000 to genetically engineer you. Okay, that's also treated. So we had these questions. So how much technological intervention should we spend with our children is one of the big questions. And should that ever be unethical? One we might who should control? So the next paragraph starts, not only should scientific and technological knowledge, information and publications be freely accessed and used, they should also be independent of government and other interest groups' interventions. We need free and wide dialogue. So for example, should the president of your country determine what's going to be a good child? Now most likely it means that your president in this case will choose somebody who would never use drugs, because very much against drugs. Somebody who likes law and order. Somebody who likes to follow that the president says is correct. Many governments will do such a thing. But if we do this, that seems to be also be breaking this diversity of humankind. The fact that some people try to do something different makes our society rich. And then we have now definitions of what's an illegal drug or a legal drug. That's interesting as well. So for example, I currently live in California. California legalized marijuana. Some states it's legal and some it's not legal. But most states legalize alcohol. So you can drink alcohol. And now in some states you can also use marijuana. Which is a harmful drug and who decides? And the danger is when you make something illegal, you leave it to crime to use. I don't agree with using drugs, but I think it's not for me to tell you not to have drink, or not to occasionally smoke a drug. When you harm somebody else, I think I have a duty to try and stop you doing that. And drugs cause harm. But if you're using in your own home and not driving your car, not killing people, then maybe I don't have a business to get involved in your life. So these are things we need to discuss. Should the government control? So should the government tell you, for example, that you can only get married if you're a man and a woman, and that a lesbian couple or a homosexual couple cannot get married? It's against the family. There's another big issue, a social issue. But we have other countries where a gay couple or a lesbian couple can have a baby genetically related to them. And even they can have, using nuclear transfer, they can have the embryo related to both of them. So isn't that interesting? That's a technology. And should we make the birth of a child a crime? Probably not. So these are, many of the questions of bioethics are like this. The freedom of research. This is another big point in our summit statement. There's a narrowing distinction between clinical research and therapy. So we do not share the view adopted by the 2018 summit statement that it would be irresponsible to proceed with any clinical use of heritable germline editing at this time. But rather, we said a case by case. Because maybe the issue is we need a freedom of research, and some cases may be ethical, and many cases may not be because it's going to cause harm. So we think a case-by-case approach is better than pointing all cases with the same rejection for 5 main reasons. We will never assess properly the value of not to edit if we cannot compare the actual clinical value of doing so. The casuistry and its results might help to create a constructive discourse in the global bioethics community to go ahead, beyond the moratorium approaches of the past several decades. Not to edit doesn't imply that technologies like CRISPR couldn't be used in opaque ways or finding an alternative just around the corner. Further than this, it implies that we will be less ready to detect its misuse due to our practical and experience with new generations of gene editing tools, besides the technological decay in the cutting-edge current ones. And it is a human right to share in the progress of science and reproductive liberty. So So these are statements which we're trying to look at why it may be ethical to allow people sometimes to do this. So I don't know if you've heard, but last November, a scientist in China, Dr. Hay, reported that he had done the germline gene editing of 2 babies. Have you heard of this story? How many have heard? Put your hand up. Yes? Good, some of you. So that's why we had to revisit, especially and urgently, the question, because for 30 years there's been a sort of de facto moratorium that we should not do human germline gene editing of sperm and eggs and embryos to give rise to children. But this scientist in China broke the Chinese guidelines and broke the international convention and reported the births of 2 healthy girls, apparently. So now he could not attend. He's actually under some sort of house arrest. He instantly became from a hero to a criminal in a matter of a few days when international pressure said, well, you shouldn't have done this. But one of the critical things is these 2 girls who were born as a result of gene editing. They're meant to be more resistant to HIV and AIDS because their father is infected with HIV. And so if your father or mother are infected with HIV and you're born, it's likely that you're going to get HIV through the process. But do you know what HIV is?
Yes.
Okay. So you may know that about 10% of people naturally are resistant to HIV because of a certain allele of a gene on their cell receptor system. So what he did is he put this allele, this particular form of this gene, into the embryo so they would be resistant to HIV. It's a naturally occurring resistance mechanism, but it's only found in about 10% of people. But if you guarantee that it's in your embryos, then probably you're not going to suffer from AIDS. It stops retroviruses getting in. It's not only protective against HIV, it's protective against other retroviruses as well. So it's a bit like, imagine a vaccine. You've had an immunization in the past? Yes? Everyone has immunization. So why not have the immunization against the retrovirus? So you can understand the logic of it, the medical use. But is it safe to do the gene editing? Well, many scientists say it's not safe because we don't know exactly what will happen. So that's the dilemma. When do you start to do this gene editing? Because you'll never be 100% sure until you've done some cases and see what happens. So that's the dilemma for us in regulating the gene editing. When do we think it's safe enough to do? Because it'll never be 100% safe until we, have done it for some generations, so we know it's 100% safe. Even to have a vaccine, it's not 100% safe. You know that. But most people don't get sick from vaccines, and it's worthwhile for us to have vaccines. We also think that the vague details of the case don't allow us for a responsible scientific reaction. How do we promote research? It's important to promote research. These are useful goals. It must include the safety of how we do this. We heard in our summer we had a scientist who had done gene therapy for beta thalassemia. Thalassemia is a hemoglobin disorder, if you know thalassemia. So there are some gene therapy trials of babies with thalassemia. This was a very interesting case because we can treat thalassemia by blood transfusion and transfer of bone cells. Then we were told that after 30 years, the cost of treatment is around $300,000 US if you live to 30 years, which is a lot of money. Many countries, this is well beyond the means of any parent and beyond the means of any government. So gene therapy may provide a treatment, and it has worked for some of these children. But that's just changing the babies when they're born, not changing their genes of their inheritance. So we concluded that the primary reason to reject the choice of parents to apply germline gene therapy to a serious disease is significant risk of harm to the future baby. But how do we establish standards for preclinical evidence and accuracy of gene modification? Assessment for competency of practitioners of clinical trials, enforceable standards of professional behavior, and strong partnerships with patients and patient advocacy groups. So these are the sorts of people that need to be involved. We need to have clinical trials to try it, but how do we establish this? Currently around the world there's ubiquitous use of cosmetic surgery. Already some physical enhancement is accepted, whether it be vaccination, vitamins, cosmetics, or cosmetic surgery. How many of you have done cosmetic surgery already? Don't put your hand up. It's a question, a private question. How many want to do it? Again, you can keep it private. But you're changing your hairstyle, you're changing your eyeglass, you're changing your fashion. Or you have to wear a school uniform, yeah? University uniform. But cosmetics is normal, yeah? So, do we accept it? If we accept it, then what about changing it to make people appear in different ways? So while improving human capacities such as health and intelligence through any means, including gene therapy, may be desirable, the danger of social justice and discrimination looms in the background. So if only rich people can do enhancement of intelligence, because only rich people can send their children to St. Paul's University, it's enhancement. Poor people may be lucky if they get a scholarship. The same for anything, yeah? So gene editing could be the same. But the thing is, then all the generations in the future maybe have this injustice. But education also has this. So this is not a new issue, but it's an issue which we have to reflect on. I'm going to go to the question, what future do you want? Is this a question you ask yourself? So once we've started to think about the technical questions, such as, should we do gene editing? Or should we stop certain diseases? We're left with this question really, do you think about the future? I hope you do. And when you leave university, are you going to help shape that future? Or you're just going to blindly just go and get a job and be worried about getting money and getting a good car, a good house, good husband, good wife? Are you going to be worried about people's happiness, if they believe in God, if they are moral? Who can decide what's moral and not moral? So children, as you see in this, all these children are looking for the future, but their parents, if you look behind them, are actually looking, they're lost, they're no longer thinking about this question. The problem with our education system is often people give up. So please do not give up. One of the messages of bioethics is think about shaping the future. Do not forget this question. Because if you do, the future is whatever economic forces will take you. We have also differences. How many people use whitening cream? How many people go to tanning studios? Well, see, I know from empirical studies that generally in Southeast Asia, most people use whitening. Whereas if we go to Europe, most people are using tanning. Isn't it funny? People are not happy the way they are. There is discrimination against dark-skinned people. That's pretty common. So, look at your cosmetics. Both young men who use cosmetics, some of you quietly, and young women who probably more openly use cosmetics. It all has whitening. Interesting, isn't it? It's a eugenic goal, a racist goal. Why do you want to become white? And just to, it's very strange. Cosmetic surgery. It's really funny, isn't it, that people with small eyes want to become bigger. People with bigger eyes want to become smaller. People with a small nose want to become taller, bigger nose. And people with big nose want to become smaller. People with big breasts want to be smaller. People with little breasts want to become bigger. People with big bottoms want to be smaller, and little bottoms become bigger. It's funny, isn't it? This is just the way people are. Why can't we just be happy the way we are? And then we have interesting cases of gender and sex change. So some women want to become men and some men want to become women. It's also, okay, we try it out. But it's not so easy just to try it for a day. Okay.
Change your mind after.
So, we come to a question such as the pursuit of a good life. The pursuit of a good life is a goal that all persons can hope for. A good life should be understood in a holistic sense. It's clearly more than just a contented life free of want and fear. At the international level, this is what the United Nations was established to help provide. This is also the duty of all governments to provide to their citizens and those with the abilities to provide to those in need. Local or global wisdom provides a number of answers to the question of what a good life is. The extension of local wisdom to global love can be seen throughout history. In the words of Eric Fromm, if I truly love one person, I love all persons, I love the world. I love life. If I can say to somebody else, I love you, I must be able to say, I love in you everybody. I love for you the world. I love in you also myself. And it reminds me of people like Lao Tzu in China and other philosophers around the world. So, bioethics as a field, if any of you want to study bioethics, and we may be offering soon a master's degree in bioethics and other subjects together with some course. So what do we do with bioethics? Descriptive ethics is the way people view life, their moral interactions and responsibilities with living organisms in their life. I have my bioethic, you have your bioethic. How do we describe that? You might describe it as an anthropologist or a sociologist or a biologist or a psychologist or philosopher. How do we describe that? It's really interesting. Even if we're twins, if I ask you some questions, you will have some difference. Do you agree with your sister on everything? So even twins who should be very similar are not identical in their belief system. And they're people from the same culture and not identical. Some of you will agree with things I said and some will disagree. We can describe that. So ethics is this concept of balancing benefits and risks of choices and decisions. The underlying heritage of ethics is seen in all cultures, in religions, and writings around the world. So this is one of the interesting things of the ethics. Some trends in applied ethics are global and others are regional. For example, the International Bioethics Survey conducted in 1993 in 10 countries in Asia and the Pacific. It found positive views towards genetic enhancement in China, India and Thailand, with less approval in the Philippines, Singapore, and the majority rejection of this in Japan, Australia and New Zealand. The questions regarding genetic screening and gene therapy suggest positive support for eugenics among a significant portion of the population, especially in China, India and Thailand. So what this means is that for people in some countries, they're happy to do genetic engineering, and others are not. So does that mean, I can describe it, but what's the consequence? If it's democracy, you let people do what they like, don't you? So it means some countries will do genetic engineering and others will not. That's a challenge. Have you heard of eugenics before? Eugenics means good genes. Okay. So this is an image of eugenics from 1931 by the National Eugenics Record Office in the United States. It says eugenics includes all these subjects. We now believe that socially programmed and compulsory eugenics is unethical. But we also believe that individual choices to make life better are probably ethical. So how do we find a difference? When there's freedom of choice, maybe it's ethical, but when it's a social program, it may be unethical. So this is a question for bioethics that we fought. While ethical principles may be pre-human in biological, social and spiritual heritage and thus almost universal, the balancing of them varies between individuals. So how do we balance all these different ethical principles like loving good and not doing harm? It's different. So that's why bioethics is very interesting and how do we understand people's choices. The second way to view ethics is prescriptive ethics. It's to tell others what's ethically good or bad, or what principles are most important in making such decisions. It may also be to say that something or someone has rights and others have duties to them. Can somebody tell you what's morally right and what's morally wrong? Some religions say that. What's morally right? Okay, no euthanasia, no abortion, no homosexual couples. So they're going to say these things. But who has a right to tell you if you are free to think? The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 1, is All people have a right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. This is the foundation, I guess, of bioethics. How do we freely pursue our own development? How do we educate people to have that capacity and desire to make their choices, and of course to choose wisely? There are international standards for bioethics. There are 3 United Nations declarations on bioethics. Are these descriptions of reality, or are they prescriptions of what we should do? They're both. The Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights in 2005, every country in the world agreed to this framework. There's like 15 principles of ethics that we agree on. Whether we are in the Democratic Republic of Korea, North Korea, we're in the Philippines, we're in the United States of America, we're in Myanmar, we're in Swaziland, we agree to these declarations. Now, how we get consent, how we think about privacy will be different, but we can dialogue about the fact that we do agree that privacy is important, or solidarity is important. So that's how we have progressed bioethics. And the third way to view ethics is interactive ethics discussion and debate between people, groups within society, and communities. Such dialogue skills are necessary to live harmoniously with others. So we have this discussion, a dialogue of ethics is pre-human and there's many sources of wisdom. So we can have this dialogue. We have traditional ways of a structure. When you go to a doctor, does the doctor tell you what to do? Paternalism is it informed consent or informed choice? Which one? We're in a transition to informed choice, thanks to smartphones and other ways of individual choice. But it's a transition. So bioethics education is something which is important for everyone. Freedom of expression. You can have a freedom to express your views. A dialogue is a foundation for this. It's very important. That's why, the Bioethics Club or the discussion forum is critical. You can discuss anything, including things that seem to be counter to the teaching of institution, counter to the teaching of your country. But unless we dialogue, we have freedom of thought, only on paper and not in practice. But in bioethics, we try to think about why we do things. We have diversity, and that's part of human dignity. Have you ever used a photocopy machine? Why is this photocopy machine built in this way? Okay. The photocopy machine is built in this way because it tells you the answer. It's designed for inclusion. In the office, we should have an office where people in wheelchairs can work. But I don't think you normally see a photocopy machine like this. Normally they have all the stuff underneath, so it's very difficult for people in wheelchairs to use the copy machine the same way as a person not in a wheelchair. Okay, so it's designed for inclusion. So if we design our buildings for inclusion, we don't need to engineer everybody to have the same physical attribute. Bioethics is holistic. So the bridges between different cultural and epistemological foundations of bioethics have also been strained by the dominance of Western paradigms of principalism and the emergence of academic profession of medical bioethics. If I can enhance my house, can I enhance my body? Who can limit my choices? Does your house look like this? Yes? Do you think a person in this house can enhance their house by building in a different way? So why can't they enhance their body too? If you can enhance your house, your car, why not enhance your body? So these are questions of ethics and philosophy. Which viewpoint of a future will we have? Anthropocentric and human-centered, biocentric, centered on a living organism, ecocentric, centered on the ecosystem. Do you know elephants? Do you love elephants? Yes. What's in my tie? Elephants. Okay. You may not have heard of this. When somebody dies in your family, in some cultures you have a grave. Is that right? A cemetery. It's pretty common. Yeah. Elephant cemeteries are interesting places. Elephants usually have a migratory path, let's say 600 or 1,000 kilometers going around. When they come back to the skulls of their family members, they pick up a skull in their trunk. I don't have a trunk, I can't do it. They pass from trunk to trunk the skulls of their family members. Next year, when they come back, they do the same thing. What does it tell us about the spirituality of elephants? What does it tell us about the social aspects of elephants? The psychology of elephants? We go to cemeteries. We think somehow that's something special for our culture or even for our species. But it's not. So that's another really fascinating thing of the study of life that I enjoy, is that we understand other species. Why do we do the things we do? So it challenges some of our preconceptions and our arrogance to say that only human beings do this. It's very arrogant to say that. It's like colonial people in the past when they came to the Philippines. The Spanish and the Americans, they colonized. And they said, these people, they treated them like animals. They don't know how to believe, they don't have a proper belief. We're doing the same thing to some other species too. And so just think about these questions of bioethics. What is our view of nature? Biophilia. Do we love nature inherently? It's an advantage to us probably to love nature because we have to be sustainable. I did a number of works on universalism, ethical values for the environment with different groups of people. Started to challenge some of the preconceptions, what's ethics of sustainability. Maybe there were too many publications, maybe we don't want to be challenged, but we have to be. We have to re-challenge our thinking of the future, of the nature of human beings. Have you heard of a tsunami? Wait, wait. Have you heard of tsunami warning stones? When you go to Japan, you can see tsunami warning stones. They're built on the side of they're usually a marker, and they say a big wave came, many people died, don't build below the stone. It's a marker. Because in some parts of northeastern Japan, they have tsunamis every 60 years. 15-meter tsunamis. How high are you above sea level in St. Paul's University? Do you know? Do you know how high? What's the altitude above sea level? It's a homework. Now we have this modern thing, we don't want people to build in the red zone. So let's say you live in a flood zone of a river. The Philippines, we know it's going to rain. Yeah? It's always raining. We know that poor people live next to the rivers and they always flood. Why do we let them live there? Because they have no money. They have to only live there. But their life has no value? Is that why we put them there? And we tell them you have to move, but they have nowhere else to go. So we have these sorts of warning stones for disasters. This is me visiting deserted farms in Fukushima after Fukushima nuclear reactor explosion because they didn't build a tall enough tsunami warning, tsunami protection fence. It was 6 meters. When they're having a 15-meter tsunami, 6 meters doesn't make much difference. It doesn't make any difference. So a good life for all creatures is what I'm trying to talk. All people make moral decisions using a range of ideas which are not as diverse from each other as different etiquettes may demand. So even if we're born in a different culture, we have different etiquette, but actually the way of thinking is not so different. For those who've been very busy writing down all the notes, and I appreciate you, very diligent, writing down many notes. If you would like to take the PowerPoint copy, you're most welcome to take it. Okay. Because I don't have time to go through all the slides. But we have a mandate, a consensus that we need bioethics education for all people. If we're going to think about our future, we need this bioethics. So I've been trying to think about bioethics for the last 30 years, making materials you can find on the web, sharing these, developing our degrees. How do we think about bioethics? Everyone should. So 6 years ago, I co-founded a university called American University of Sovereign Nations. It's a graduate education trying to decolonize education. We have been founded on sovereign land, on Native American land. You know, there are indigenous peoples in the Philippines, yes? But most of them don't have their sovereignty. It's actually a very interesting question. In some nations, they're still sovereign. In some nations, they're put on reservations, such in the United States. And in some nations, they're just left alone, but under some other form. How do we develop thinking? This is a building in Arizona called Casa Grande, a big house in Gila River Indian community. It's a 3 or 4 story building about hundreds of years ago, long before the Europeans came. And it marks solar solstice and lunar solstice. Do you know what the solar solstice is? The shortest day of the year and the longest day of the year. It's important. Every culture who is successful to plant crops has this. Yes, because you need to know when to plant your crops and when not. What is a lunar solstice? Well, every 17 years, there is a lunar solstice. Did you know? It's not very important in the Philippines because it rains all the time in the Philippines. Yes? But if you live in a dry place, such as in the southwest United States in Arizona, the lunar solstice is quite important because every 17 years there's going to be 2 or 3 years of drought and there's no rain. And if you don't know that's coming, you will starve and die. So only the cultures that knew to store the food for the drought years of the lunar solstice can survive. It's a very advanced astronomy. But it's survival. If you don't know that you're going to prepare for a drought, you're going to die. So it's sort of selection. But it's interesting. So this is pre-European. So we try to teach the wisdom of all these countries, nations, with different programs, Masters in Public Health, Bioethics, Sustainability, Resilience, PhD program. So Professor Marlon is a graduate from our doctoral program. He's a doctorate of Bioethics and Sustainability in Global Public Health. Professor Dennis just joined. So we have these people in 40 countries around the world. St. Paul's University, we've had an MOU for now 6 years to share programs. Trying to establish bioethics education and these programs in every country in the world. That's my goal. We have students from these countries, alumni, and we try to think about bioethics. What is bioethics? It's both thinking of knowledge, skills, and personal moral development. Okay. So in conclusion, you're going to become professionals, is that right? Whatever profession we have a unique life path, which will provide us lessons as the basis of our teaching for the future. So let me summarize some strategies. Realize our own image of bioethics and how our experience can be used for teaching. So clarify your own values. Step 1. Step 2. Study what to teach, what principles and what competencies to assess. At your time when you're learning, think about how are you going to be an educator? How are you going to empower and change your world? Learn how to teach, what methods and skills you have as a teacher, whether it be a formal teacher or informal. If you're going to transform this society to something better, think about the skills you need. Assess the steps and develop more. Continue to innovate. Train yourself. Get further degrees. Never stop learning. I'm very lucky that I'm a student for my whole life. Isn't that great? I love to study. So, learning every day from different people. Further develop materials to help as a living resource and help mentor other professionals and students. Maintain networks. Develop new ones as appropriate. Learn from others and be a student for all of life. We can't do it on our own. We work with a network. Some of the people you work with today and your students studying together, you'll continue to work with in your professional life. And through that community of learning and action, we will change the world. How do I form a mature society full of well-informed and balanced persons? Bioethically mature means a person or a society who can balance the benefits and risks of alternative options and make well-considered decisions and talk about it. In our society, we have to talk about everything and make good decisions. That's what the bioethics is as well. We can embrace many values, but the value of pursuit of a greater wisdom for a better future is one that has brought us together in the pursuit of wisdom. Which country is this taken in? Do you know? Which country do you think this is from? Which country do you think this is? It's from the Philippines. These, are they studying? Are they thinking? Do they have a good life? Think about it. In your working life, you're probably going to work in Metro Manila with smog, noisy cars, commuting 3 or 4 hours each way to work. Is that a good life? You should be sitting on the hill, virtual learning, praying to God, looking at the ocean. Isn't that a wonderful life? So just think about the meaning of life when we do these things of where you're trying to become. Of course, we need cities, we need to think about it. But always be questioning what values we have. So I hope some of that was useful for you. You can find much more information on the websites of the University and the Advisory Institute. I'm very happy to answer any questions you have, and I hope a little bit of what I said was made you think about yourself. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Please. Yes, please. Can you speak loud or come up here to the mic? Okay, please.
Good morning. My question is, in the near future where the genetic engineering would be prevalent due to the research and technology, is there going to be a problem in the biological diversity?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a very good question. If you change the genes to stop, let's say, one genetic disease, if you're doing this from germline gene editing, you know that the parents carry that genetic disease, and you're going to correct, let's say, to stop that child from having muscular dystrophy anymore. Does this affect the biological diversity? Well, actually, for genetic disease, about 1/3 of the new cases of many disorders are spontaneous, not in the parents already born. And especially if you have serious genetic disease, the people with the genetic disease do not have children normally. So many of the cases in the past have been spontaneous. So spontaneous mutations will continue to occur. You're still going to have that diversity, so it's not going to have an impact. Okay? Let's say it's another condition such as Down syndrome. Again, Down syndrome children and adults they're normally infertile. They don't normally have children. So it doesn't really affect the diversity of the future children. However, if we do selective screening and abortion of fetuses with Down syndrome, we do have less people with Down syndrome living in our society. So it does affect the diversity to some degree. But the social practice in most countries is that if you have Down syndrome, you are locked up at home or in an institution. So actually in a regular society, generally you're not there. This is unethical. So actually it doesn't affect the diversity too much because people have hidden people with some of these disorders away from the regular society because they don't want this diversity. So we could have two approaches. One, we could say we should have everyone mainstreamed in the mainstream society, accepting people with diversity, but also offering to people the choice, if you'd like to do genetic screening, because of the interest of the child not to suffer, then you do that. So we can approach diversity by encouraging it. But we will reduce. So let's, in the case of dwarfism, there are less dwarfs in society because of growth hormone treatment. That's for sure. Okay. But, you know, is it a harm as a society? I guess there are different ways of being different. If I'm in a wheelchair, many accidents occur after I'm born. I'm in a wheelchair because of a traffic accident or because I fell out of a building. So this is not genetic, but we still have this diversity. So it doesn't really affect the long-term future because most people with a serious genetic disease don't have children. But we should really work for social diversity to encourage an inclusive society where everyone is welcome. Because a lot of people have something different, or what we call a disability, or different ability, because of something that wasn't genetic, in fact. It's a good question. So my conclusion is no, I don't think it's really seriously affecting our diversity. If it was a social program and compulsory that everyone does it, this would be both unethical but also because it would affect our diversity. So we have to be careful it doesn't become that. Other questions? Please.
Is it still possible for a person to acquire disorders such as autism or Down syndrome? Since biological editing is possible, is it still possible for a person to acquire disorders such as Down syndrome or autism as such?
It's still possible. So let's say you have Down syndrome. It's because it's called trisomy 21. Yeah, you have free chromosome 21. The reason we have Down syndrome people alive is that chromosome 21 is about the smallest chromosome there is. And most other trisomies, for people born, do not survive. The embryo doesn't grow. Trisomy 18 and trisomy 13 occur occasionally. So the Down syndrome is less. Those can occur at the time of the separation of chromosomes. They could occur after even genetic engineering. So because of chromosome abnormality. But once the screening that is used to select the embryo, once the embryo is made and the chromosome number is fixed, it stays much the same. Okay. It's very rare, but it would occur in a significant manner. Let's say in a 4-cell embryo, the chromosomes are going to be pretty stable. It only happens at the beginning. So you can select the embryo. But germline gene editing is not going to affect this to stop you having Down syndrome. But for some other genetic disorders, it will protect you against that. But you still have a risk of spontaneous genetic mutation. Other questions? Yes, please.
This one is in regards to policy rather than actual science of it. So, how would you regulate? How would you regulate research in a way that's not overly cumbersome, that it prevents progress, but it also helps prevent future abuses to both humans and our environment?
Thank you. So, I guess the less bureaucracy you have, the more important. So, for example, if I come to what bureaucracy often means many rules and regulations. So that becomes very cumbersome. So let's say I have one committee which decides everything. I need to go for one committee. But let's say I make it 4 or 5 committees, then it becomes cumbersome. So we can try and streamline the regulation. If you're doing research, if you're not involving human embryos or animals or some moral agent, then you shouldn't really have any regulation to stop you doing any research. But once you start to use a human embryo, for example, or use a chimpanzee, you might have an ethics committee to appeal. What happens that makes it very bureaucratic is sometimes you have many committees to go through, and it stops research. Sometimes it's illegal to do such research. And what that means is a researcher who wants to do research will probably move to another country where there's less bureaucracy and do that research there. In the case of the gene editing, the basic research, maybe we should be free to do that research. But once we start doing on embryos, so we have to consider the approval for use of the embryo. In some countries it's against the law, in other countries it's okay with case by case. And then once I try and implant that baby, it involves a human experiment of not just an embryo. And maybe then we impose increasing bureaucracy on trying to restrict that. But sometimes there's too much bureaucracy, and that inhibits scientific research. So, and sometimes states prohibit certain types of research. Again, that's the problem. Okay. So, as a scientist, we want the freedom to think, the freedom to do research. But as a society, we want to protect vulnerable individuals. But it shouldn't be burdensome. For example, in some countries, if you, let's say, you got pregnant as a man, it would be very interesting, wouldn't it? Yeah? So, there might be all sorts of committees who might be interested in studying your pregnancy. But what would be very critical is what's going to happen to the embryo that's growing in you for some reason. And you have a certain time frame. Some of you may have read in the newspaper the case of the 11-year-old girl in Argentina. Have you read this case recently? The 11-year-old girl in Argentina was raped by her grandfather and forbidden to have an abortion. Okay. So she gave a cesarean birth as an 11-year-old girl to the fetus, who's now as a baby, who's a product of incest from her grandfather's raping her as an 11-year-old. Because of too much bureaucracy. For me, I consider that unethical. Now, it doesn't mean the baby who's now born is, how do we deal? Well, we have to love the baby that was born. But the whole process seems to be an example of inappropriate laws and bureaucracy. To give a very simple and common sense response is that this is a case where an abortion should be legal. But bureaucracy meant that she couldn't get, because there was an issue of consent of her mother and grandmother and who can represent the 11-year-old pregnant girl. So that's an example. Bureaucracy leads to sometimes unethical events, but then the consequence is you have birth of a baby, and okay, you've got a baby now. We just have to love her, but all the sympathy must go to the 11-year-old mother. It's really strange. So bureaucracy sometimes makes very strange choices. So often laws seem unethical, that's why we have to revisit them. Other questions or comments? Any comments, anybody? Questions? Shall I ask you questions? Should I pick somebody to come and ask a question? So maybe you should ask me a question. Might be safer. Please.
Is it okay to ask how much it costs, or only rich people can afford it? The genetic editing.
Okay, at the moment, so if you want to do gene editing right now, you probably don't pay anything because the scientists want to do the research on their research grant. Okay, so it's a good time. However, the danger is it's not safe because it's not yet proven. That's why I want to do research. So, but if you have something very innovative, at this moment, scientists will pay for research innovation, so you probably don't pay. But if you want to do some types of practice where there's some existing thing, it can be expensive. Let's say you want to do growth hormone injections for your child. This is standard. You probably go to Mexico and pay some money, or maybe you can do it here. No. But if I consider having a child, and is it cheaper than buying a house? Yes. Is it cheaper? It may be. Is it the same price as an expensive car? Probably yes. So what are you going to do? If you let people spend that much money on their expensive car or their house, then maybe the cost is not an issue. But the inequality question is that people with the same condition will not have access to that technology. So then that means it's unfair. But then you can go to an expensive university or buy an expensive house. It's going to improve the quality. So of your, so it's sort of, we allow it for some things, but we don't want to keep on doing this. Other comments or questions? Yes, please.
Is there a slight possibility for a new disease or any complications because of gene editing?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that is the main concern of the safety, is that we will try to change one gene specifically, that we might insert 15 copies of that new insert around the genome. And they could go in the middle of another gene and cause a malfunction of that gene. That's the primary concern at the moment, and the safety. So if we're not sure of the delivery of a gene, then, and how many copies go in, then yes, they could go anywhere. So yes, it could create a problem. And for example, most cases of gene therapy for individuals in the past 30 years used a virus to transfer the gene into the normal gene to fix that condition. Some rare immunodeficiency disorders are treated by gene therapy. But in these cases with most viral vectors, it increases the chance of leukemia. And although these children who used to have to live in a bubble or would die were treated, like 20% or more of them got leukemia. And so they have to be monitored because of that. So it's a consequence. But is it better to be dead and not have leukemia, or is it better to be alive and have the cancer and then you can try and treat that? So but now if a new type of gene editing like CRISPR or targeting, maybe there's less chance of that occurring. But that's why we do experiments, to try and listen. But that's the primary safety concern. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes? Marlon? Any comments? So I hope that's been useful for you. If you have some comments or questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. I hope that you will continue to think about these questions, and please try and ask difficult questions. Okay. And together we can try and find the answers to these things. But the dialogue is really important. Come on, I think. Thank you.
There are no more questions? Okay, so may we request, thank you very much for that wonderful lecture. Don't worry, there will be a follow-up from the teachers around here. They will have an exam. Okay, may we request the Dean of the College of Art Sciences and Education, Dr. Reynilda Salandanan, to award our Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Mazer and our token. May I read the citation? St. Paul University, Quezon City, St. Paul University System awards this Certificate of Appreciation to Professor Darryl Mazer for generously sharing his time and expertise as resource speaker of the topic Ethics of Human Genetic Engineering and Planetary Sustainability. The March 4, 2019, held at Damate Noche Hall, St. Paul University, Quezon City. Given this 4th day of March in the year of our Lord 2019. Signed, Dr. Reynilda G. Salandanan, Dean, College of Art Sciences and Education, Sister Helen Malubay, SPC, Vice President for Academics, and Sister Maria Nilda Simasirang, SPC, University President. Okay, another picture with the students. Doc, ako na po mag-picture. Doc, join them.